All right, and welcome back to another edition of Plurilock Invites. Very pleased to be joined by Cyndi Coon, founder, president, CEO of Laboratory5 Inc, which is an ecosystem producer, writer, facilitator, and trainer for higher education, NGOs, and government agencies, including, but not limited to, U.S. Secret Service, U.S. Army Cyber Command, and Space Force, to name just a few. Cyndi is a subject matter expert in information shaping, futurecasting, and threatcasting. Cyndi is also the founder and producing director at Applied Futures Lab, chief of staff at the Threatcasting Lab, and producing director at the Weaponized Narrative Initiative. She is on the board of directors for the People-Centered Internet. Cyndi, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat with you today.
So to start off, because I think folks are not necessarily going to recognize the term, but what is threatcasting?
Yes, it is a term that is connected to the field of foresight. So foresight has been around since World War II, which is a series of about 50 plus tools that are for really specific and really open ways of collecting and analyzing data. Threatcasting is a series of foresight tools put together and include backcasting exercises in the social science space. It's a way to look out into the future time horizon. Usually we choose 10 years, collect data, analyze that data, and then give applied outcomes of what potential threats could occur in the space that we're looking into. And threatcasting was invented by my partner in all of this, Brian David Johnson, when he was the chief futurist at the Intel Corporation. And while he was there for 10 years as their futurist inventing this model, he really discovered and realized that this was something that the government and military really needed to have their hands on. So he left and we stood up the Threatcasting Lab together at Arizona State University. And most of our clientele is in fact government and military. And we can talk more about the details of how threatcasting works, but that's the gist of it.
How does threatcasting differ from just a traditional scenario planning? I mean, in a business context, right? Just kind of thinking through, hey, well, X could happen, Y could happen. What would we do in the case of X or Y? What is the fundamental difference?
Yeah, so it's really, imagine it like a spectrum. And if you start all the way over at the left-hand side, you really start with strategies and SWOT analysis, things like that. You move forward into foresight tools, then scenario planning. Then kind of in the middle there is futurecasting and threatcasting, which are both social science methodologies that produce a great deal of data. And they're very specific methodologies creating a person in a place experiencing an event. And then imagine the threatcasting results produces a lot of data and a lot of future potential outcome. And so with that, then it really becomes the script for the next phase, which would be world building and then wargaming. So it kind of sits in the middle, and scenario planning gives you what are the possibilities in the real space, but not the additional volume of data that can be looked at over and over for the coming decade if you chose the 10-year mark. So it has a lot longer legs to it than a traditional scenario planning.
It's interesting. We just spoke to Colin Berry around threat intelligence, and we touched upon during that conversation, we touched upon ideating who are the bad guys and what could they do, what could they do to us. But it was very in the here and now, quite tactical thinking. Whereas I think what I'm understanding from yourself is that threatcasting really is looking at a much more strategic landscape and almost looking over the horizon, to borrow a term.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. And just to sort of imagine the scope of how we get there, we choose 10 years because most human beings can imagine themselves a decade from now because they can see where their life came to from the last decade. If you push them beyond that, we get to flying cars and things that are a little more unreasonable. If you go too soon, 5 years, say, people really hover around 2 years. And so if we push them out to 10 years, we're going to get results that are going to land somewhere around 7 years. That's usually kind of the average, about 7.5. It's pretty difficult to actually get to 10 years because just much of our work involves emerging technology. And so the movement of that, of course, is so much faster than we can plan. And when we build that person in a place experiencing an event or a threat, what we're doing is creating deep, deep empathy in the participants that are a part of the exercise, building this human and their surrounding community and culture and where they work. And at the point when we're ready to take the next step and turn the adversary, the threat actor, the competitor onto our person we've created, the participants then are feeling really empathetic because they've built this life. And so the benefit of that then when we ask them to become the threat actor is they want to do everything in their power to imagine, well, how am I going to protect this person who I just created this life? And so you get far more creative on what are all the potential threats to look out for because of that empathy that's placed at the beginning. And that unique lens really allows for a lot of scenarios to come into play. And the other thing that we get a really rich, robust data set out of this exercise is because we also make participants do it more than once. So they'll have the same data input from the subject matter experts, but we'll ask them to create different scenarios multiple times, up to 3 times, because each time they do it, in the room, they report out to the room. So say we have 10 teams, they each get 2 minutes in sort of movie trailer style to say, what have you been up to for the last couple of hours? And when we do that, the natural human spirit of competition comes into play. And when people start seeing, oh my gosh, wait, you created a threat like that? Whoa, that's farther than our team even thought of. Now you can see each additional round, the room, each team ends up really pushing each other. And so you get a lot of data. And that's why when analyzed for the research question we were asked to investigate, we can keep going back and looking at it because there's so much data that over the next few years, we can still sort through it and find additional things, which we frequently do.
So that's maybe a good jumping off point. What would an example be of a scenario or potential case study that you've worked on?
So let me tell you what it looks like, kind of how it plays out, so this makes sense. The methodology is really content agnostic, so we can put anything into it. And so we have put a lot of different sponsors will come to us with ideas, questions they want to have answered. And how it begins is we have to sit down and craft a really specific research question that has a constellation of things around it. And that helps us determine, where do we go seek the data? Who are the subject matter experts? And then when we bring them together, we're really having the opportunity to play with that space. And so we've worked in a lot of different lenses. We've done a lot for the military. And so we've spent a lot of time, I would say that the most iterations in one place has been around disinformation, misinformation, malinformation. We've had repeat runs with Army Cyber Institute on moving that forward and what could that mean. And so for several years now, we've been in that space deeply, repeating and then adding additional data. We look a lot at emerging technology of all forms, sentient tools and things of that nature that we have to wonder what's going to happen. And then AI, we just did a look for Secret Service into the future of digital currency and how criminals might use that to their advantage. Yeah, that's a few
Fairly
examples.
fairly topical right now, I think, given what's happening
Yeah,
in crypto and Bitcoin. Um,
yeah,
I think one of the things that had caught my eye, because well, two items. I mean, first, I'm super appreciative of the fact that the data that you collect is actually published.
yeah.
And so I've gone through a number of the reports, which actually make for fascinating, if not terrifying, reading. But I wanted to ask you specifically around digital weapons of mass destabilization. So what
Mhm.
was this project, and how did it come to be?
Yes. So DITRA was our sponsor in that, and they came to us with a research question that they really wanted to see what were all the many possibilities that should be considered. And so when we brought participants together for that exercise, that was one example that I feel like if this podcast were listened to publicly, it would be, shocking. But for your community, this will make sense. So we were trying to push connections between possible weapons of mass destabilization and things we hadn't thought of before. So here's the example that's a little terrifying and would keep people up at night. But we celebrate when the humans can go really, really dark, because that means we're going to do a better job protecting our fellow humans from all kinds of threats. So something that happened during the exercise, one of the teams figured out how to connect every single US school bus and set them off all simultaneously, nationally, all at once. And so it's things like that that we were thinking about. How do interconnected systems cause massive destabilization in ways we have not thought of before? And that was the goal and the focus. And so we spent 2 days asking participants to really think wildly about how could interconnected systems destabilize on a massive scale.
I think one of the things that I found really useful from that report in particular was some identification of existing trends and where that might lead. So, as an example, digitally enabled lone wolves coalescing. And so, one of the things that we've noticed in the cyber industry is that ransomware as a service, this idea has made it such that the line between somebody very sophisticated versus somebody who maybe has a lot of intent but does not have the sophistication blur a lot of it. And so because of that, the types of capabilities that non-sophisticated actors can deploy is increasing simply because of these effectively market conditions. So that's always been visible to those of us in the industry, but it's separating it's maybe not the right way to say it. It's not separating so much as it's putting that in context of, here's a data point. What could that actually mean? What were some of the other, I guess, large mass destabilization events that you came up with?
Well, I want to talk about that first really quick that you just brought up, because I think it's so important and it really has to, it answers your question too. But so if we think about the current education system globally and the peril that it is in, one of the things that was really noteworthy during that project was the training programs that exist globally to educate small timers into this world. So you're speaking of we think, or previously ransomware, as your example, had it required a really sophisticated outfit to run it, and now, you know, mom and pop shop, let's say, smaller scale, are able and capable of these things. Well, part of the reason that's happening, and this was a really big aha, is because of these training programs that exist around the world, where those with so much as a cell phone can learn and earn income for all of these kind of a variety of cyber, you know, disabling practices. So then the interesting piece becomes, where is this on the ground connectivity in the digital space? So it feeds into digital equity and digital literacy and training programs. And how do you fuel that potential? It's, you can imagine how easy this is. You know, you have people in places who don't have employment, but they have a cell phone, and you say, I'll give you this much, you do this. That, I think, is a really big space, that combined with another space that is unavoidable. And as I said, the methodology is really content agnostic. And therefore, we have looked at a lot of different research spaces, including some that we don't have reports that we're able to share publicly. And what I have observed over the last many years that I've been doing this, it does not matter if it's cyber driven, if it's education driven, if it's any lens that we put in, one giant thing that appears every single time is workforce. Workforce is the key to the problems, and it is the key to the success. And it comes up every single time, because in that same example, if we're talking about a massive ransomware network, and then we have all these smaller folks on the ground doing things, that's a workforce issue. They're doing that because they need employment. And so I would say that's one of the biggest things we see that is destabilizing across every single thing we look at, is there's a workforce issue. So much so that now we're being called to specifically look at industry specific workforce issues, because it's so prevalent.
So it's interesting. Those of us in the cybersecurity industry will often joke that cybersecurity would actually be really easy if it weren't for all the people, because frequently the people are the weakest link. If you look at even nation states who have effectively unlimited resources, how do they go after individual targets? Well, they'll frequently go after the people, because they know that that's how they can gain initial access, gain that foothold. How does that, I guess, how does the insight of workforce being the key enabler or disruptor, how should that inform those of us in industry to think about the future? What does that insight provide us?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have this movement right now, right, of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what we're really discovering is, you know, those are not buzzwords. That's not a thing that's going to come and go. Maybe it will change names, but the biggest thing to pay attention to is to look around and say, who's missing? Building empathy in the workspace, so that we have a lot of data that shows us that the tech industry, which includes the cyber industry, have a lot of what we call FODs, first only different. And those folks who are the first only different in their different positions, first woman, first person of color, etc., they struggle the most, because the culture isn't inviting to them. And so we're losing tons of innovation because we're not looking where it's at. That combined with, we have to, in each unique industry, figure out a system to invite in individuals who are not using the traditional route. So I'm seeing a lot of companies, Google's a perfect example, right? That you can take classes online and pay for them and then get hired by Google and they'll pay you back. That kind of idea, instead of a 4-year degree, that is actually a national security issue, that we do not have enough people for all of our infrastructure on every span of it. So it's a big thing to tackle and it's going to be a big ship to turn, but it's globally one of the most destabilizing things right now, because we have a lot of incredible, intelligent individuals who are not choosing traditional career paths. And so how do we capture them? And then that becomes especially difficult when you're talking about asking them to work for the government, where they could make, 3 times out in industry. So it needs a big solution for sure.
Cyndi, as we're wrapping up, what would the thing be that you would say to folks in the cyber industry? How can they leverage the data that the Threatcasting Lab has produced?
Yes. So all of our data that is public, that we're allowed to share, we put up on the website at threatcasting.asu.edu, and you can download that. If the imagery in the reports is not enough, if you need the actual the worksheets, we build workbooks that everything comes out of. We share that, so anyone would just have to reach out and say, we'd like these data sets, and if we're allowed to share them, we do. Our methodology is open and public. We wrote the book telling you exactly how to do it, and that's available. So our goal is really to globally teach everyone we can how to use futures tools. And I would say in cybersecurity, having someone on team that has some foresight tool skills, some future skills, can benefit the whole room, because they can get everybody to think a little bit forward. There's not always a luxury of time to sift through things 10 years out, but this could take place on every team, in every department, etc., once a year, and you're looking out 2 or 3 years and really coming together, thinking about what should be top of mind, what should be paying attention to right now. And that's why we wrote the book, and it's out publicly, and we're really available if folks want to reach out and ask questions, because it's really important that for all of our fellow humans, we think about the future and the threats that might appear.
Awesome place to end it. Cyndi, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.